Fighting Blindness Canada's Viewpoint is a virtual education series that brings you the latest in vision research presented by health experts from across Canada. The webinar you're about to watch is a recording. To learn more about the research we fund and upcoming webinars and events, please visit our website at fightingblindness.ca. This Viewpoint webinar is proudly presented by Bayer and supported by Novartis, Allergan, Janssen, Biogen, AGTC, MeiraGTx, and the SickKids Foundation. We'd also like to thank Accessible Media Inc., our national accessibility partner. Everyone should download the AMI app, which is a fabulous resource, and you can watch excellent programming, including previous Fighting Blindness Canada events. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Let's just start off with some introductions. I'm just going to go around and maybe if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you're connected to Diabetes Action Canada or Fighting Blindness Canada. That would be great. So Bert, can we start with you?
Sorry, I always have to remember to find the mute button. I'm a patient partner. I work with some researchers on their research, trying to make sure that we focus it on patient outcomes or outcomes of interest to the patients, not just to researchers. And I've been a diabetic, type 1 diabetic, for almost 55 years. I have retinopathy and I am legally blind and have been for quite some time. So as you can imagine, it's takes a little bit of adjustment, but I've got a good life, and I have a family of which I'm very proud, and they are all healthy. Unfortunately, my immediate family does not share the diabetes or the blindness, so that's a good thing. I do have a sister that has type 1 diabetes as well, though.
Okay, thanks, Bert. How about Diana next?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Diana Sherifali. I'm a certified diabetes educator, nurse educator for 20 plus years. I'm also a nurse researcher at McMaster University and a researcher that works closely with Diabetes Action Canada. I think my angle for today is also as the lead author of the Diabetes Canada Clinical Practice Guidelines for Diabetes Self-Management Education and Support. So thanks for having me today.
Great, thank you for being here. And lastly, Leanne, how about you?
Hi, my name is Leanne Baarda. I'm an independent living skills specialist with Vision Loss Rehab Ontario. I have in the past run some diabetes focused intensive rehab groups. So we had diabetes education and vision rehab come together in the middle, and we did a lot of patient education, and we hope to continue that with a new program in January.
Fantastic, and you're in Toronto, right, Leanne?
And I'm in Toronto, yeah.
Excellent. All right, so let's start. So my first question is going to be for Diana and Leanne. So in your professional experience, what are some of the most common challenges that you see that patients or clients who have diabetes and eye disease are facing today? Leanne, do you want to start?
Sure. So one of the things that I find is really difficult for our clients is learning how to manage the condition non-visually using equipment that is not accessible or has the bare minimum of accessibility. So maybe you'll have large print, maybe you'll have it white print on black backgrounds, but for those using insulin pumps and things, they're not fully accessible. So things that could, be life-changing, and with a little bit of voice or something, it hasn't been done yet. So I'm hoping, down the road with some advocacy that'll happen. And then the other big thing is I feel like clients sometimes need help to work through the big feelings associated with having vision loss and diabetes, as both are kind of life-changing. So maybe getting some counseling for both can be really beneficial in helping to mourn the loss of vision and autonomy. And then for me, once clients have sort of accepted the vision loss, the more open they are to rehabilitation, skills training, and our diabetes education groups.
So can you talk a little bit about some of those strategies that you use when you're working with people that have diabetes and vision loss?
More of the ILS or more of like the diabetes focus part?
Both, I guess, would be good.
Okay. So when we're doing our groups for diabetes vision and vision rehab, we'll often partner with community groups and nurses in the community. So we have partnered with Rexdale Community Health in the past, and then they've come in and brought nurse practitioners, and they helped our clients learn how to manage their A1Cs. And then we've had nutritionists and foot care specialists come in, and so then we would go ahead and then reinforce the messaging from the nurses and the educators, and we would try to find ways to help them manage their condition more optimally. And a lot of that included, of course, some peer support. So the woman that I used, what I was co-teaching with before, also has vision loss. So she would do support groups, which she felt were really beneficial to help the clients talk through their feelings and listen to each other and learn from each other. And I thought like the peer support was probably the biggest thing, because they could sort of say, well, this trick worked for me. What are you, what have you used? And then they'll say, oh, I didn't know about this device, or I didn't know about this particular glucometer. And it was really good for sharing.
Absolutely. Diana, how about you? So what do you see as some of the most common challenges that are faced by the people that you work with who are affected by diabetes?
So I'll thank you for that summary, Leanne. I think I'll just take a step back and speak even more broadly. And that is to say that I think with diabetes in particular, we're always challenged with emphasizing prevention and being aware of how to seek support and access to care to prevent, to screen. So we know that glycemic control, there's a relationship between one's diabetes management and diabetes control in relation to complications and eye disease. The unfortunate thing is people don't always feel when their blood sugars are a little bit higher. So over time, this becomes problematic, and the body gets used to slightly elevated blood sugars. So to that end, I think the first thing I would say is a problem is just even overall awareness of one's glycemic control, awareness of supports. So Leanne touched on some great opportunities and avenues for support. Number one, peers. So align yourself with peers that are really supportive, and that could be supportive in terms of a listening ear, support for travel, for communication, whatever it might be, but also awareness of who else is on the team. And I think that that comprises the broader team, looking at primary care providers, your nurse practitioner, your family doctor, your diabetes educators, folks working in particular communities like yourself, Leanne, and Fighting Blindness Canada. So I think to that end, the more people are aware of supports and allies to help them, the better.
Absolutely. And I think that just also speaks to sort of where you both would see someone on their journey, right? So
Yeah.
Diana, you may see someone before they're having vision loss as associated with diabetes, whereas Leanne, if you're seeing them, they have some form of vision loss already. Do you have particular strategies that you use, like practical strategies that you use, Diana, when you're working with individuals who are maybe newly affected?
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that I'm very fond of, and this is listed on Diabetes Canada's website, is the ABCDESSS. I see Leanne's nodding, so that sounds familiar, and hopefully it's familiar to those that are listening in today and watching. So ABCs was historically all about clinical manifestation of diabetes. Glucose control, A1C is the A, B is blood pressure, C is your cholesterol, D is drugs. And I think this is also very important as it relates to diabetes control, blood pressure control, supporting people to prevent complications, but also treating complications, such as some of the treatments for eye diseases as well. E for exercise, and we know that there's certain exercises that are probably more advantageous for those living with diabetes and eye disease. But I think it's really the triple S that I want to focus on today. Stopping smoking, we hope that that's pretty obvious in this day and age, but the other two are self-management or self-care. What are you doing to care for your diabetes? And the final S is screening. So this tool that's available at Diabetes Canada's website is a handy little checklist, if you will, that you can take with you on your journey speaking to diabetes educators or anyone that's part of your broader diabetes team, just to ensure that you're checking off all of those critical elements of diabetes management, whether it's screening for complications, treating your complications, and then managing diabetes day to day.
Absolutely. And, the first webinar that we had this month was with Dr. Chowdhury, who was talking a lot about sort of just that, you may have diabetes and not be affected by vision loss at all yet, and not even really understand what your risk is. But we know the longer that you're affected by diabetes, the more likely you are to have some form of retinopathy. So making sure you're getting those, yearly checkups just to see what's going on in the back of the eye are so critical, because, we do have treatments and drugs now that you can prevent a lot of this vision loss if you catch it early. So definitely, that sounds like a great tool. Thank you for sharing about that. So Bert, what advice would you sort of give to someone who's newly diagnosed or having trouble managing their diabetes?
I'm going to share something that speaks to this, and these are my speaking points, because sometimes people have trouble, hearing me when I start speaking too quickly. I think Leanne and Diana referenced a lot of this, but I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that it's going to scare us. We have to admit that it scares us. We have to acknowledge those fears because they're very valid. Whenever we have something happen to us, we have an emotional reaction, and we can work with that emotional reaction, or we can try and pretend it doesn't happen. But if we don't deal with those things, sooner or later it's going to come back to haunt us. So recognize those fears, work with them, share them with your support team so that you can deal with them, because those fears can prevent you from doing some of the essential things. So the 3 S's, one of the first things, stop smoking. So many people that I've run into that, use smoking as a crutch to deal with stress. If you don't admit that you're afraid of this new thing that you've been hit with, you'll have a hard time not using that crutch. The other thing, or the next thing I would say is, we all have to remember that we're not alone. We have support networks even when we don't realize it. So the doctor will right away help you, hopefully will help you find some of those support networks. But diabetes educators, people like Diana, even people like Leanne, who's not specifically a diabetes educator, but more somebody that helps you work with some of these other aspects. But diabetes educators, they come in various flavors, various forms. They are a tremendous resource that will help you to recognize what you're dealing with, find a way that works for you. Because one of the first things a lot of people don't recognize is that diabetes is a very personal disease. No two diabetics have quite the same reaction, quite the same physical reaction, quite the same emotional reaction. And you're going to have to find what works for you. And a diabetes educator, along with your doctor, along with a dietitian, along with the other support people, and never forget your life partner or your parents or your siblings, those people that are around you and within that support group, they can help you to walk this difficult road. And then the next thing I would say is accept that your life has to change. Because if you have all of a sudden discovered that you're diabetic, or that's discovered that you're going blind, your life is going to have to change. You're not going to be able to do things quite the same way that you did before. And you notice that I'm saying that you don't have to do it quite the same way. I'm not saying that you have to stop doing things. If you like jumping out of airplanes and using a parachute to land, that doesn't have to change because you're a diabetic or something else. I played competitive sports until I was in about 55. I was a diabetic. I lost my sight. In fact, that was the reason I eventually had to stop playing competitive sport, because I got too dangerous to the other people on the playing field. I didn't see them and I ran over them. That can get pretty dangerous. The final point that I would say is, to finish off that point is, your life has to change. Seek how you can make those changes so that it works for you. Okay, change doesn't have to be bad. In fact, change is the only thing that is certain in life. We don't want to change. We like that comfortable place that we found ourselves in, but life is going to make you change. The final point that I would say is, get educated. That's been referenced here a few times. There's a lot of great resources out there, and your support team will help you find some of those resources. Today with the World Wide Web, there's a lot of misinformation out there, but there's an awful lot of good information. So don't simply accept what you read. Ask questions. Check with your support team. Check what is good information. But the Canadian Diabetes Association, the DAC, a lot of these different organizations have phenomenal repositories of information. If you have vision loss like I do, first place I went to was CNIB, and the help that you can get at CNIB, the wealth of information is simply phenomenal, and make use of that. Sorry, I just have to shut up my insulin pump. Make use of those resources, and make good use of them. So I stopped sharing because I didn't need that anymore. But yeah, make use of all the tools that are out there. There's a lot of tools out there. They're not all going to work equally well for each person, but you have to find out what works well for you. But take charge, take control, be active, be an advocate for yourself, and take those steps which help. Things that don't help so much, well, hopefully we will be smart enough to not use them.
Thank you, Bert. That was great. And I think that really leads well into my next sort of question. So I'm wondering, you talk a little bit about tools and resources. So I'd like to get a sense from you, like everyone, what are your best practical tips or tools that you use, either yourself, Bert, or when you're working with others. So we could maybe start back with Leanne. So practical tip, helpful tools. I know everyone is different, but what are some of your favorite recommendations?
Sure. So some of the things that I've learned along the way for our clients is the use of the insulin pen. So I don't know if I'm not sure how much I need to describe, but the insulin pen kind of looks like a large pen, but it's filled with insulin, and you have to use cartridges that reload them. So for some people, having to tell the difference between one from the other type. So a really simple practical tip is you put an elastic around one and leave the other one without. Or I'll say, get an adhesive Velcro circle and put it on one, so you can identify one from the other if you have some neuropathy in your fingers. So using the little scratchy Velcro is a really easy way of doing it. It's super low tech, but it works. Again, with the insulin pen, so you can count the doses by counting the clicks, so you know exactly how much you're administering. So that's a really cool auditory trick that clients can use. Now, I don't know how much people are still using the old style with the syringes and the bottles, but there are devices that were sort of created to help clients with vision loss still be able to use the insulin and the needles independently. There's something called a count-a-dose. It's used with a BD 50 unit syringe, and it can hold either 1 or 2 different bottles of insulin. If you have the count-a-dose to measure the insulin, you sort of turn the click wheel with your thumb on the right hand, and then you'll be able to hear the click of the wheel for each unit of insulin that you dial up. So that's kind of a neat tool. The other option too for talking meters, one of the big ones in Canada is the Oracle talking glucometer. It's easy to use. There's no coding. You need a small sample size. You get pretty quick results. It has a large screen. It allows you to do some alternate site testing, which is good because if you are also going to be a Braille user, You don't want to always prick with the center of your fingers, because that's where you would read Braille with. So you can do it on the sides instead. One of the neat tricks that a nurse taught me years ago is if you want to line up your blood sample with your meter, is to kind of do it like on the side. So I'll pretend this is my thing. So if I have if I'm trying to prick myself, I do it on the side of my finger, and then I line up my meter and I kind of slide it up so that the blood will automatically go into where it needs to go. So it's just kind of learning how to manage non-visually, which is not an easy feat, especially when you're trying to figure out where to put your finger and where to test with the strip and all the lining up. So that can be a bit of a challenge. So learning how to line it up and use your sense of touch to figure out where things are is a good place to start. In terms of the pump, they can be used for people with sight loss, and a lot of people use them really successfully, but the menus aren't always accessible. So there is right now a huge push through our SickKids Foundation to get manufacturers to make it more accessible. And then, of course, the other thing too is advocating for yourself to get if you require home care or the support of a personal support worker, to advocate through the different LINs to make sure that you are able to get the services that you require, and that you're able to get a nurse to come in until you learn how to do it yourself, to take your blood and to give you the correct amount of insulin until you're able to manage it independently. So those are some of the major tricks that we use.
That's great, Leanne. Thank you. That's a good list. I have a lot of questions always, but I was curious when you mentioned about pricking the finger. I hadn't really thought a lot about that, but of course, like if you're trying to read Braille, you don't want to constantly be poking the spot where you would be using. So do you notice like a lot of times like people have difficulty with Braille if they have diabetes, with like retinopathy in their fingers, like losing their feeling and sensation?
Right. So I have had some success with diabetics reading Braille. We have a lot of tricks to help them kind of make sure that they have the optimal use of their fingertips. So we'll make sure that we tell them to keep their hands warm before the lesson, to apply lotion, to take frequent breaks while they're practicing reading Braille. So we try to we have different ways of testing the sensitivity. So if Braille is not going to be the medium, then we kind of go to auditory solutions.
For sure. And the nice thing is there are a lot more auditory things out there now than
absolutely
in the past, for sure. Diana, how about you? What are some of your favorite tips and tricks?
Well, I think we'll make Leanne an honorary certified diabetes educator. Great tips, Leanne. I think I would just add, in addition to the tips that Leanne provided for reading Braille, some of those tips are very synonymous with actually glucose testing. So one trick we always did was, if you put your hands together as if you're going to pray, where your fingers are not touching each other, those are the ideal spots to get a capillary test. So again, removing sort of the pads of the fingers as options for testing is ideal. But I want to sort of, again, take a bigger picture here. And I think my biggest tip for anyone living with diabetes, type 1, type 2, irrespective of how long you've had diabetes, is know your diabetes team. And I think this is paramount with respect to, Bert's lived experience. And just to follow along the competitive sports analogy here, Bert, I think the key thing is to think about yourself as the most valuable player on that team. And so who do you need around to support you? Well, Leanne talked a little bit about community resources, home care support, nursing support. I would think even more broadly, think about online associations, credible websites, Diabetes Canada, etc. I think your local pharmacists play a huge role in terms of diabetes day-to-day management, particularly pre-COVID. They were sort of the one-stop shop for a lot of people living with diabetes to go in and ask their pharmacist some questions. And more readily, we're seeing pharmacists that are actually certified diabetes educators as well. So that's fantastic. Beyond that, again, Know how to communicate with your team. So if it's your primary care provider, what's the best way to get a hold of them? So is it through telephone? Is it through a video conferencing line? Is it through a chat sort of secured portal? Obviously, in light of COVID, there have been, challenges with respect to seeing your team members face to face, but there's also some really neat opportunities to continue to communicate in real time, or what we call synchronous, but also asynchronously, where you can just send a chat, text, and then someone can follow up with you. So in some respects, access to other diabetes team members has actually improved to some extent. But I think the biggest thing is I would start to really reflect on who comprises your team. It can be healthcare professionals in the broadest sense. And again, scaffolding. So primary care provider, your specialist for your eyes, for your diabetes, and sometimes those take on different roles. But I also think, thinking broadly, who are your friends, who are your colleagues that you can really have frank dialogue with, frank discussions about how you're feeling. Today might not be a good day. What are you coping with? So sometimes it's just nice to have a sounding board. We know that diabetes is also closely related to mental health and wellness issues. So again, as Bert so eloquently discussed in his own lived experience, I think it's important just to have some non-police like friends. I know sometimes family and friends want the best for their loved ones living with diabetes, but sometimes inadvertently they become the glucose police or diabetes police and say, oh, you can't do that, can't have that. At the end of the day, have someone that can offer you non-judgmental support. And sometimes that may mean going beyond your immediate family just to a good friend or someone like that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We all know our families mean so well, but I know my husband's diabetic, and he's probably feels the same way about me because I police him all the time. It happens. So Bert, how about you? I know actually Leanne was talking a little bit about insulin pumps, and I think you mentioned you have a pump. So what kind of technology, or either technology or low tech things do you use that you find really helpful in managing your diabetes?
Low tech, CNIB, great source of, okay, that's I believe it's a 7-power loop, okay? I have to have it because so many things I can't see. I lost the ability to read paper early on after retinopathy, because one of the things that retinopathy first affects is light contrast. So unless you have pure white paper, which quite frankly, about the only thing that you can find with pure white paper is some of the old style Bibles. They don't print books on pure white paper anymore. So unless you have something that's on a pure white paper with a crisp black print, I can't read it. So, the modern, I'm looking at you right now on a 27-inch screen. Those things are great because you can make things really big and it works. The modern insulin pumps, I have the Tandem now. I had the one from, can't think of it right now, but the insulin pumps have gotten much better over the recent past, where they are much more legible. You can actually see them. They're backlit. The Tandem is actually in color. I don't have to see clearly in order to be able to see what's on that pump, which in the early days of pumps, it was not good for visually impaired people that had limited vision. And I 5 years ago, I can remember having to, in low light conditions, ask for help to read what was on the pump, which is not a good thing, because you have to be able to see that in order to give the insulin, the required amount of insulin and stuff. So the newer technology is helping in pretty much every which way. I mean, the first blood testing machine that I had, it was probably 14, 16 inches long. It weighed about 7, 8 pounds. It was the size of the old style cassette decks that had the, the microphones in them and stuff. You put the blood in, and it wasn't a drop of blood. It was about 5 drops of blood you had to put in that thing. It took several minutes to come back with the blood test. It was, fairly accurate for the day, nothing like today's. But it was life-changing to have that, because before that, we only had what was called urine testing, which it would have been laughable if it wasn't so poor. It basically indicated whether or not sometime in the last 8 to 12 hours you had spilled sugar into your system. It really didn't do anything meaningful. There were a lot of people who tried to claim that you had to use that to guide your care, but it was a joke, and a very bad joke. So the current developments in technology are very, very beneficial. They are a help, but really the most important resources you have are not technology and not tools. It's the people around you. So some of my coworkers are actually on this call listening in to me speaking, and the people that sit around me at work, one of the first things I do is I teach them, okay, this is my glucose, this is my dextrosol tube. It's got dextrose in it. If I start acting silly, give this to me and tell me to take some, that sort of thing. You can't hide you can't hide diabetes from the people around you. You have to be upfront and make use of those people around you to support you. Because people, if they know that you have a condition that may cause an issue, it will make them more willing to help you. It's actually, in at least one case, allowed somebody to share with me that she had epilepsy and how I could help her the way that she could help me. People helping me allows me to help them. Very often you will find that the people around you have needs as well. And if you are open about your needs, they'll be open about their needs. And we can actually walk through this difficult path through life together. And so people, whether it's somebody like Diana, a diabetes educator, whether it's somebody like Leanne who helps you with independent living, there's a lot of people around us that have different skills, different expertise, but they are all around us. But the only way that they can help us is if we let them, if we reach out and share. And that's, technology is great, but it's not the be all and end all. People is what's important. People is what will make or break you.
Thank you, Bert. Yeah, that's a really powerful message. I think that the idea of community and what you said about the woman who disclosed her epilepsy to you, again, we're all interdependent on each other, and it's better that we embrace that than think about having to do it all ourselves all the time, for sure. So I want to go back to something we talked a little bit about before in terms of COVID. Of course, this is a unique moment in time we're living in. And, we did talk a little bit a few weeks ago about for people, for example, who have to get injections to help manage their eye condition, how that's been particularly difficult during COVID, especially in the early days of not knowing whether you should be going into your doctor's office, but at the same time not wanting to sacrifice, your treatments. So how do you feel? Maybe we'll start with Diana. Like, how do you feel that COVID has affected diabetes? Or how's it added an extra layer of complexity to managing diabetes?
Right. Well, I think it's, where do I start? It's had a huge impact. I think just even, perhaps I'll start off sort of at a system, big picture level. And that is to say that I think in the initial throes of COVID and the pandemic and lockdown, et cetera, I mean, we saw a massive shift of resources, whether it was government support, funding, healthcare professionals, et cetera, shift priorities from, say, diabetes management, outpatient ambulatory care, home care visits, et cetera, to more acute crisis dealing with the pandemic. And I mean, slowly as things evolved and the more we learned about COVID-19, the risk factors that are attributed to some of these higher mortality rates in individuals, but then subsequently how to prevent and manage and what to do if you do contract COVID-19. I think from a system level, we're starting to see that things are opening up. And granted, I say that now with certain regions in Ontario under lockdown. But I think, we're learning. So what does that then, how does that translate then to, say, healthcare providers and diabetes management? So I think with that initial lockdown, what we've been able to do is shift how we deliver care, where we've had these discussions going on for 5, 8, 10 years about virtual diabetes care, virtual support, whether that's telephone, virtual, Zoom calls. Some primary care providers are using other platforms, but the speed and rate at which we've adopted some of these technologies has been just awesome from a great standpoint. However, at a patient, at an individual level, we are also super aware that this has created perhaps a greater gap or greater void or sort of a canyon, if you will, of care. So number one is that we know that there's some folks that just aren't able to access virtual telemedicine, digital support for a variety of reasons. And obviously within the scope of this talk, as Bert highlighted, these technological advances are tools, but without human support in all of that, they're just tools in a toolbox that may sit there. So I think what we're trying to understand now is how do we best support people? And I think, no one solution will fit all. I think what we need is an all hands on deck approach, and to use the analogy that we're, all in this together, literally, but also symbolically. And that is to say, things like a good old telephone still works. And so many times educators are just picking up the phone and just checking in on patients. So having that warm voice on the other line just to say, how are you doing? Some of my own clinical research has been the use of coaching. So how do we just reach out and connect with patients at their own pace, at their own agenda? What is important? How can I support you? We will certainly see an increase in digital support, et cetera. But that hybrid model will still continue. But I think at the end of the day, what really gives me pause for consideration is the overall stress and anxiety and distress of just COVID on top of all of these other layers that people are living with, housing insecurity, food insecurity. So this has been a real concern for me. And I think, I think it's safe to say that diabetes is not always a democratic disease, particularly when we talk about type 2 diabetes. So I think the more that we can reach out and support each other, a phone call just to ask, how is your day going? Food insecurity, housing insecurity, all of these broader determinants of health that are not necessarily related to diabetes, clinical appointments, blood pressure control, but other things that keep us well, healthy, and feeling good about ourselves are certainly percolating and rising up to the forefront as we manage this pandemic. So I think, at the end of the day, the more we can reach out and support each other, as Bert so eloquently said again, we really need to just step forward and support each other. And I think it's the community that will come together and quickly highlight where there's some gaps, but also where there are opportunities that we can learn and collaborate and support each other.
Absolutely. Very well said. I couldn't agree more. Leanne, I know, your typical model of care has had to shift as well because you're not able to go out into the community. So how has COVID sort of changed the way that you're working with people now?
Oh my goodness. So before COVID, our model was community-based care. So we would visit clients wherever they were, whether it was in a hospital, a senior's residence, in their home, shelters, you name it. Wherever the clients were is where we went. And I have never had a desk job in my entire life. And I'm used to being active, and I'm used to seeing people in their communities, and I'm used to seeing, all the face-to-face. And then all of a sudden, as of March 13th, that ended abruptly. And I had CNIB, or vision loss rehab, had to shift their model of care really quickly. Within 24 hours, we had to shift. And we went completely virtual, and we were offering services now by phone, by Zoom. Now I've done assessments with Toronto Rehab through when they do their home safety checks through Teams. I've had to do, let me tell you, trying to figure out, through a shaky camera, if the client is managing well, and then maybe you see something in the assessment. I'm like, oh, there's her phone. Is she using her phone? As the person pans really quickly away from with the phone, with the camera. So trying to, learn things about the client through basically secondhand or third-hand information has been really difficult. But on the flip side, it's given me a chance to talk to clients and really find out how they are. And I have a number of seniors that I check in with on a regular basis now to make sure, because they live alone. So, I had one client that I was in regular contact with, and I stopped hearing from her, and her phone stopped answering. So I didn't know if you guys knew this, but the police have a non-emergency service you can call, and they actually sent a unit to go and check on her for me. And the police were really great. They called me back within 25 minutes saying they got into the house and everything was fine. And so, working with our community partners, I was able to ensure that my client was safe and well cared for.
That'll teach her not to call you back. I bet she had quite the surprise.
Yeah.
At her door.
Yeah, exactly.
Business.
Right. And then, of course, we've had clients with food insecurity. So we've had to call, I think, is it 211 to get information about food banks in the client's area. And the Red Cross has been really great about that. They'll actually do food. They were doing food drops in the early days of COVID. I'm not sure about this round, but I guess I'll find out. Anyway, so it's just been a real shift in thinking, and I've had to get really creative teaching through FaceTime, and it's been a thing.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And Leanne and I go way back. We've been friends for many years. And my husband was actually in school with her when she did her independent living, and he's an orientation and mobility instructor. So he teaches people how to travel safely with a white cane. And trying to do that over Zoom it's
not possible.
It's really, really, I mean, it's not funny, but it's funny because it's not funny. But then listening to him try to teach someone over Zoom how to do something is just, it's comical. So it's really difficult. But, something that he has said, and I think, you've echoed that as well, is that at least it's given you an opportunity to really connect with clients, to talk to them, to learn more about them, and doing that check-in that, Diana was talking about, like just knowing that there are human beings out there, that you're not alone. I think it's important for all of us, especially at this bizarre time, for sure. So I have one more question, and then we can answer questions from the audience as well. So again, if anyone has anything, please do email me or type it in the Q&A box. But maybe just lastly, we've talked about a lot of things, we've covered a lot of resources, but are there any other resources that you think people should know about before we close out? So Bert, how about you to start?
Yeah, one of the ones, I'm in the Durham region, so east of Toronto, and we have the Charles Best Center here. Now, it is a phenomenal resource that has a bunch of nurse educators, registered nurses, registered dietitians, kinesiologists, and they work hand in hand with the doctors. They're also qualified from all the different pump companies to teach insulin pumps. So they do a lot of the pump education as well. But that group of people, I can't thank them enough. They treat everybody from 3-month-old kids when they, and that's heartbreaking when a kid at, 3 months is discovered to have type 1 diabetes. How do you deal with that? But anyways, they work with all of us. I'm not the oldest, I'm not the youngest, obviously, but they work with all of us, and they treat us as individuals. They work with us to determine, what our needs are, where we are comfortable in our care, what things will work for us. And I've come to discover that most areas have something equivalent. There's one out of McMaster. Diana can probably mention who they are later. I don't remember what their full proper name is. There's one down in the London area. There's another one out Kingston Way. There's a number of these across the province, and I'm sure in other provinces. And not only do they have caring people and programs and ways for people to get together to support each other, but they also tend to accumulate a lot of information and resources that way. And tremendous resources to connect into and to make use of. And you may not need them right now, but connect with them, because there will come a time when you do have a need. And they work very well with your doctor. And there will be times, as I've aged, my metabolism still races compared to the average person, but it's slowed down a lot compared to what it used to. And you have to change your diet. And talking with a registered dietitian about how food works and about glycemic control and, those things. My doctor is a great doctor. He's written a book on diabetes, Dr. Ian Bloomer, a phenomenal specialist for diabetes. I really love and appreciate him. But when I need food advice, he's the first one to tell me to go talk to the dietitian, because he's not a dietitian, So connecting in with a group of professionals that range from diabetes educators and all of these other things is just phenomenal. Okay. Sorry, my grandson's going home for the day. Hey, Xander.
Oh my goodness, what a cutie, little guy.
He is. Hey, say hi.
You're a rock star, Xander. Hi.
He can't hear you because the headset's on.
Oh,
okay.
All right,
Thanks,
Diana,
Mom.
how about you? Any last minute resources that you would like to share about?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Bert is saying, I think again there's a whole bunch of diabetes education programs out regionally, sort of more locally in your community health centers. Sometimes they're even affiliated through YMCAs, pharmacies, etc. I think the key resource here I would highlight and encourage folks to think about is that you can actually self-refer. So you can get yourself in the door to these diabetes education programs for classes. And then just speaking about classes, on the Diabetes Canada website, they do have virtual diabetes classes available through COVID as well.
Another one of the kind of silver linings of this whole situation, there's a lot of resources out there online that you can access. Leanne, how about you? Any final resources or thoughts?
Sure, I do have a couple of, if we want to go a little bit techie here. I was looking up to see if there were apps that were accessible with voiceover and that are connected to meters. So I learned about one called, let's see, where is it called? Glucose Buddy. It's a diabetes tracker. And so you can manually enter your glucose numbers, your carb consumption, your insulin dosages, and your activities. So I thought that was kind of neat. Sorry about that. Sorry, I don't know how to use my own phone apparently. Okay. And then, so one of the things that we're going to be doing, our diabetes group that's coming in, I don't know, Diana, if you're familiar with the AADE, the 7 key behaviors that lead for diabetes self-management.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to base our group about that one. So it includes healthy eating, being active, monitoring your blood sugar, tracking levels, foot health, taking medication, problem solving, and healthy coping, and reducing risks. So that's each week is going to cover one of those topics. So we're looking forward to partnering with different people to see. We always say we're the experts in the vision rehab, and you guys are the experts in diabetes. So it's always nice to find somewhere we can come in the middle to give clients the best care possible.
And Leanne, I know I sign up for, I know your vision loss rehab. I know it's different now, not CNIB, but CNIB also offers programs as well, right? Like I get an email, and I think there's some diabetes groups and things there, and those are all online as well, correct?
Yeah. So we have one for the CNIB Foundation. I believe Ryan Hui is providing that one. I've heard some great things about it, so I'm hoping that to talk to him in the near future as I'm designing this new program for VLRO. So hopefully, I know that I need help, so I'm always looking forward to reaching out to others.
It's so new for all of us, right? We're having to learn all these new technologies and bits and pieces to make our lives work for us, our work lives work too.
Right, exactly.
I just had another question, but I think
I'd just like to follow up on what Leanne just said there. Big surprise to me, but something a lot of people don't realize, as diabetics, foot care is critical. It's one of those really, really critical things that you have to do. What a lot of people don't realize is, as your vision goes, you can't take care of your feet. That's something that you just can't do. And that's another one of these areas where you have to acknowledge that and ask for help. Different people have different ways of getting the help. There's different ways that you can do that, but you can't do it by yourself. And you cannot afford to be so proud that you do not seek help, because if you do, you're going to lose your feet. It's that simple. It may not happen tomorrow, but it will happen.
Yeah, foot care is a tough one. It was actually on my list of questions if we had time, so I'm really glad you brought it up. But just quickly before we finish up, Leanne, did you have any sort of like practical tips for helping people manage like foot care with vision loss and diabetes?
Foot care is always a tough one. Even without the diabetes, we always recommend that our clients go see a foot care specialist, like a chiropodist, or a nurse who's able to cut nails and just to monitor the feet, just to make sure that there's no cuts and that they haven't got ingrown nails, because you don't want to have an infection that's raging out of control. So I always recommend to get their family doctor to make a referral for foot care.
Absolutely. So I think we're just about at time. I do have one question here. Maybe I could just pose this question. It's kind of a loaded one, but let's see if we can answer this. So this question was from a woman, and she said her dad is losing his sight from diabetes, but doesn't want to admit it. Bert had some really good suggestions, but are there other things that you would recommend to her to help her dad to get help with his vision loss? Is there any easy ways to get to know about vision loss or the risks of vision loss without scaring him?
Somebody like Leanne, it's scary to admit that you're losing your vision, but it is amazing what somebody like Leanne does. Like, I was stumbling. I got hit by cars, I think 5 times before I admitted I was, and I got to the point where I thought it was normal because it was happening so frequently. And so anyways, I got told, call a CNIB, and begrudgingly I did. And I can't remember the lady's name here in Oshawa, but somebody very similar to Leanne came out to my place, brought me a white cane, showed me how to use it. And the freedom I had, all of a sudden, I was no longer limited by that, blindness. I was no longer limited in not being able to walk freely, because the cane allows me to sense what's around me. It allows me to tell where there's a curb or where there's a step or there's a pothole. After a few years of using it, I can even tell how long the grass is and tell my wife that the grass needs cutting. But you actually get very sensitive with the cane. It's incredible what it tells you, but it's not going to tell you anything if you have it locked up in a cupboard. You got to use it. You know, you got to use the tools that you have. You got to work with the people that are around you. And that's so critical, to admit that you need help, that your life needs to change because you're going blind, or you're getting older, you have osteoporosis and your bones are more brittle. There's so many things that happen to so many people, but if you don't admit it, you're going to wind up in trouble. You have to admit it, accept it, and work around it. You don't have to stop doing things. You just have to find, how can I continue to enjoy my life?
Absolutely, Bert. I don't know. This is a big one for me. So I have a lot of clients who are really reluctant. They'll say, well, I'm not blind. And I said, well, I know that because the majority of my clients have some usable vision. And just breaking through that barrier alone for them to accept my teaching strategies and even just to talk to me is a huge step. And I find that getting them into the peer support groups that we have either through CNIB Foundation or through VLRC, I think that is a really good place to start, because dealing with the feelings and trying to undo all the negative connotations that society has put on being a visually impaired person. A lot of people, the general public, see cap in hand, begging on the corner. That's like the poor blind person, and trying to overcome like all the stigma around that and saying, I'm not that person. And dealing with those feelings as well. And until all that stuff is dealt with, it's really hard to accept vision rehab services. And, then of course, get on with life and start learning how to enjoy all the things that there is in the community to do. Like I tell people in Toronto, if you're visually impaired, you have no excuse to be bored. We have like blind sailing and tennis and golf and curling and dragon boating and triathlon groups and running groups and walking groups and book clubs and ukulele lessons. Like, life isn't over. Like there's just so much more to go.
I think that's a great note to end on, right? It's about adaptation, not giving things up. So thank you so much to all of our panelists today. I really enjoyed hearing from you and all of your different perspectives. It's been really great. So I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in today. When you exit the webinar, a little survey will pop up. We love to hear from you, hear how we did. We're getting ready to plan for 2021, our Viewpoint series. So please let us know what you think. We do have one more session this year on December 8th. Myself and members of our research admission team at Fighting Blindness Canada are going to do sort of a recap of some exciting developments in vision research and resources from this year. Of course, I do want to add to that resource list that if you have questions about your vision health, we do have a health information officer at Fighting Blindness Canada who would love to hear from you and can help you navigate sort of the complex resources that are out there. And her email is healthinfo@fightingblindness.ca. All right, so that's it for us today. Thank you so much again. Oh,
one last thing. David Bola put a question up on the Q&A and I answered it, but not everybody may see it. And the question was, why don't I come across more people with retinopathy? Everybody keeps saying it's such a huge thing. And the answer, quite frankly, is doctors and healthcare professionals are not allowed to share that information. They can't. It is confidential. And the sad thing is, people are afraid to admit that they've got retinopathy. I've known a number of people that have retinopathy and they swear that they don't have it. They will not admit to it because they feel it diminishes them. But it prevents those of us who have retinopathy from getting a community of shared experiences, which I find unfortunate. I wish people would admit when they have retinopathy. It's not the end of the world, especially if it's caught early and treated properly. It can be, a minor inconvenience. Mine was, much more severe. I lost a lot of vision. probably one of the, my doctor says I'm one of the worst case outcomes, but it hasn't prevented me from enjoying life. I still work every day, and we need to share when we have these things so that we can share experiences and support each other. And too many people are not willing to share.
I just muted myself. Absolutely. Well, thank you again. Thanks, Bert. That's good. I'd missed that question. I came in there near the end. But we're going to wrap up today, just being mindful of time. But thank you again. And this webinar, as well as our other webinars from this month, will be all available to view on our website. So please feel free to watch the ones you've missed and share with your friends and family. And that's it for us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.